I have been wanting to discuss this topic for quite a while, and now that we got a very tiny piece of information regarding the oceans of the Isle, I think it is time to finally address my thoughts and concerns regarding this specific aspect of the game. Underwater gameplay is a concept that is neither new to the genre nor unfamiliar to the Isle's community. As of right now, we already have a taste of that experience through the semi-aquatic animals available to us, namely Deinosuchus and soon to be released Beipiaosaurus. But for the most part, they are intended to dwell on mainland bodies of water like rivers, swamps and lakes, not necessarily oceans, at least at the moment. And that is what was showcased a few days ago on the Phase 3 channel in the official islecord server. 2 small concept arts and a short statement from Punch regarding the ocean biomes. Also, they didn't mention directly, but I'm gonna assume this is going to be implemented only on the gateway map and not Spiro, since the latter is going to be abandoned most likely the moment the new map launches. Punch package shares some details about the biome, specifically the different layers it's going to have depending on the water's depth and location, the balance between the beautiful and ominous thematic experience they want players to have whenever they inhabit the biome itself, and some gameplay elements promoted by its level design, like predators hiding within kelp forests for ambushes. Yeah, looks like we're gonna have forests everywhere, even underwater. Jokes aside, even though this isn't a massive info dump by any means, what it's shown here on its own, it's pretty decent. Aquatic biomes tend to be a lot less aesthetically varied in comparison to land ones, so it is a positive seeing Afterthought taking into consideration how the oceans will look, feel, and the opportunities they can present to influence gameplay. They even sneak peek fully aquatic NPC creatures that could help the oceans feel more alive. All of this sounds pretty great, and the art of the concept looks amazing in my opinion. I like it a lot. However, the whole idea of oceanic gameplay, no matter how good it looks like on paper, can be completely jeopardized and become a total waste of time and resources if they don't solve the numerous issues this particular portion of the game presents in the Isle specifically. But what are those problems, you may ask? Whenever a mechanic or feature is planned to be implemented, the developers need to consider a vast amount of parameters so that addition is well done and be worth putting time into making it in the first place. Inside those parameters, devs ask themselves 3 very important questions. What is the feature's purpose? Is its premise beneficial for the game's vision? And how can its implementation affect the game's systems? Answering these questions is not a simple yes or no scenario most of the time. It is instead the culmination of those answers that will determine the mechanic's worth. The feature could be in line with the game's intended experience and sound really cool, but if it's purely superficial and doesn't have any actual purpose for its existence, then it wouldn't be worth making it to begin with. Or if its purpose could possibly affect other important aspects of the game and make them almost obsolete, despite having value to the game, its addition could be more detrimental than worth, and thus it would be unwise to proceed with that idea. Now, let's apply those questions to the underwater biomes in the Isle. What are their purpose? To provide a dedicated area for semi and fully aquatic animals. Is it beneficial for the game's vision? The Isle's theme was always a mixture of natural beauty with a contrast of its horrific and ominous human-related origins, an idea that perfectly matches with the beautiful coral and kelp landscapes and the terror-inducing depths of the dark and barren ocean floor. So the answer is yes. Can its implementation negatively affect the rest of the game? Now there's the real question, because the answer is not what you might expect. This question can actually go both ways. The game can be affected by a mechanic just as much as a mechanic can be affected by the state of the game itself. And that is exactly what's wrong with underwater gameplay in the Isle. This feature has worth, it has its purpose, it is necessary, and it even lines up with the game's theme and vision. But the game itself is what can ruin all that potential, because the isle as a whole can very likely cannibalize this entire concept. Here's how. So, the underwater biome is made for, you guessed it, underwater creatures, including semi-aquatic. The list of dinosaurs that fill this role on the roster are Austro, Berry, Beipi, Deinosuchus, Deinosuchus, Megalania, Minmi, Spino, Suchomimus, and Titanoboa, a total of 10. In terms of ecosystem, it is a pretty decent balance, having numerous micro, small, medium and large tier animals, so that is definitely not a problem here. A parameter that we must also address is how the game influences players to interact with the new feature, or in other words, what would be the benefit for players to go to the ocean? Let's be optimistic here and say that it could be a safer area for hatchlings to grow, for example, or that biomes have exclusive resources that are either consumable by semi-aquatics or necessary for those species to build nests. While there is a good incentive to go there, it isn't good enough to stay there. And that is the key point. Aquatic areas are exclusive to creatures that are able to inhabit in those locations, and when it comes to the Isle's roster, that only applies to 12 out of the 60 planned creatures for the game. I added more since Pterodon and Quets can nest on the rocks, so they can still inhabit the biome to an extent, and if we spread the server's population evenly, which is unrealistic but I'm doing this for simplicity's sake, that would mean that semi-aquatic players would be unable to interact with 80% of the population while remaining underwater, being forced to leave the ocean to do so. This level of isolation would ironically be a force that promotes players to not stay there, making those biomes and its planned complexities completely pointless. Even if they add incentive for players to travel to those locations, the penalty for staying there would be so much greater that they would simply go there, get the benefits the biome provides, and leave, making its purpose completely redundant, even though the areas themselves would be a great addition for underwater gameplay. Now, this is a problem that can be circumvented in two different ways, but both of them are related to the map's level design. We could either add avenues for aquatic animals to traverse through the map, like large rivers, lakes, or even a flood mechanic, which is something Bizarre Bermuda did, or we can influence terrestrial players to traverse bodies of water, like dinosaurs having to cross the ocean to reach a remote island that provides a specific benefit or resource. Interestingly, both concepts were already shown at some point by the Isle devs, namely the flood/drought system and the existence of land bridges. The problem is that the footage I'm talking about is from years ago, when Isla Sparrow was still being developed, and as far as I know, the flood system has not been worked on anymore, so I assume it has been scrapped. We do know though that these biomes will probably be added to the gateway map, so let's take a look at that. It's hard to have an estimate of the scale here, but upon an inspection of its layout, we can see that there's barely any way for aquatic animals to traverse inland. We have two possible locations here and here, but in comparison to the rest of the map, these are two very small areas that, while they would benefit underwater players, it is still not enough covered area for them to adopt a fully aquatic playstyle without being heavily penalized like we mentioned previously. In terms of land animals traversing the ocean for remote locations, the only viable areas I can find are these two. This would certainly help a lot with this issue, but for that to work, terrestrial players would have to have a very good reason to risk their dinosaur and swim that amount of water to go to those islands, something that I feel it won't be all that common. Of course that all of this wouldn't be an issue in the first place if server population wasn't this small or the map wasn't this big, but unfortunately we are still kept at 100 players, so I'm afraid that until servers become larger, the maps need to be smaller or this issue will keep existing. And sadly, aquatic players are the ones that suffer the most, since their promoted biome isolates them from the majority of the population. Making more and larger areas like these would greatly improve underwater gameplay from my point of view, increasing the level and intensity of the interactions between land and water-based dinosaurs, diversifying the Isle's gameplay even further. But despite this concern, I'm still excited for underwater biomes. Their concept looks really good and maybe Earth thought may surprise us and my worries will end up being unfounded. Let's all hope that it's the case. A huge thank you to my Patreon supporters for supporting the channel and the content I create. If you wanna join the ranks, the link will be in the description. Don't forget to leave your thoughts and opinions down below. Join our Discord server for memes and internet stuff, and I hope to see you all next week.